Hello, boys and girls. This is Grandma Priscilla again, and I have another story for you. And this one is called Puss in Boots, and it's an old story that actually I read when I was a little girl, and that's been a long, long time ago. So here we go. This is about a cat, and I think you'll enjoy it. Once upon a time in France, there lived a miller who had 3 sons. When he died, the miller left the mill to his eldest son. To his second son, he left a donkey on whose back sacks of flour could be loaded and delivered to customers. To the youngest son, who was much the most handsome of the three, he left only a large cat, whose job it had been to chase mice that came at night to make holes in the sacks and steal grain. The poor youngest brother wondered how on earth he would make a living with only the cat for company. He could see that he would have to go out into the world to seek his fortune. "I shall have to leave you behind, Puss," he said, "for I don't see how I am to look after you." "What about if I look after you?" replied Puss. "Whatever do you mean?" said his master. "I can make your fortune for you," said the cat. "All I need is a large drawstring bag and a pair of really smart boots for my hind feet." Well, the boy was mighty puzzled, but he decided it was worth letting the cat try to win his fortune, as he surely had no idea of what to do otherwise. With his brand new boots on his hind paws and his drawstring bag slung over his shoulder, Puss set off with nothing in it but a handful of corn from the meal. The first thing he did was go straight to the nearest rabbit warren, where he opened the bag, put a little corn in it, and laid it open near the rabbit hole. When Puss laid in wait, then Puss waited and late. Let me get this straight. I'm getting tongue-tied. Then Puss laid in wait until dusk, when the rabbits came out of their hole. One rabbit came up, full of curiosity, and hopped into the bag to get the corn. Up sprang Puss and pulled the drawstring tight. Then, instead of taking the rabbit to his master, he set off to the palace, where he announced that he had brought the king a present. "Your Majesty," he said, taking the low bow, "I am a messenger from the Marquis of Carabas, your neighbor. He was out hunting today and was lucky enough to catch a fine young rabbit. He begs that you will accept it as a present." The king was puzzled because he had never heard of the Marquis, but he was pleased to have the rabbit. "Tell your master I am delighted with his kind present," he said. Day after day Puss went out hunting in this manner, and each time he presented his catch to the king. "Don't forget," he said to his master, "that you're supposed to be a marquis." The young boy had no idea what the cat was talking about, but he trusted him nevertheless. And after a while the cat started to be invited in for a drink and a chat with the guards, and he soon got to know all the court gossip. One time Puss got to hear that the king was planning to drive the next day in his grand carriage with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in France. Puss took care to find out which direction they intended to take. And the next morning he said to his master, "I think it would be a good idea to take a swim in the river this morning." The boy agreed, and by the look in Puss's eye he knew that he had a plan in mind. Puss led the way to a part of the river where the royal carriage was bound to pass. While the boy was swimming in the river, Puss heard the sound of the approaching carriage, and quickly he hid his master's ragged clothes under a stone, and as the carriage came into view, he ran into the road shouting, "Help! The Marquis of Carabas is drowning! At once the king recognized Puss and ordered his guards to go to the rescue. The boy pretended to be drowning, so that the guards had quite a struggle to get him to the bank. Meanwhile, Puss went up to the carriage, bowed to the king, and said, "While he was bathing, thieves unfortunately stole my master's fine clothing. He cannot appear before your daughter without any clothes." "Of course not," replied the king, and sent his footman to fetch a spare set of clothes from the pack in the royal carriage. Now that the handsome boy was properly dressed, the king was glad to meet the mysterious marquis, of whom he had heard so much from Puss. He welcomed the marquis into the carriage, where he sat next to the princess. "Come for a drive with us, my dear marquis," said the king. Without another word, Puss set off and disappeared around the next bend of the road. By the time the king's gilded carriage was well on its way again, Puss was a long way ahead. Soon he passed a field of haymakers. "My good haymakers," said Puss, "you must tell the king that this meadow belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, or I'll grind you all into little pieces." Now Puss knew that the meadow really belonged to an ogre who was known to be able to change his shape, so of course the haymakers had no idea if this was just the ordinary pussy cat telling them what to do, or if it was really the ogre. Soon the royal carriage passed by, and the king leaned out and asked to whom the field belonged. To the Marquis of Carabas, your majesty, chorused the haymakers. That's a fine piece of land you've got there, said the king, nudging the boy who was busy chatting to the princess. All along the road it was the same story. Puss always got there before the royal carriage. Woodcutters, shepherds, and farmers all told the king that their master was the Marquis of Carabas, because Puss had threatened to turn them all into mincemeat if they didn't. Now Puss caught sight of the fine castle which he recognized as belonging to the ogre. Puss went up to the great gate and asked to speak to the ogre. Puss said to him, I heard that you can transform yourself in the most amazing way, into a lion, for example, but I really can't believe that this is true. The ogre was so offended that he bellowed, Just you watch, and instantly turned himself into a lion. Puss pretended to be scared and jumped up on the castle roof. The ogre turned himself back into an ogre. That'll teach you, he roared. You gave me a dreadful fright, said Puss. Do you know people can say that... Let's start that over. Grandma got all messed up there. You gave me a dreadful fright, said Puss. Do you know people say that you can even turn yourself into a tiny animal, such as a rat or a mouse? But that's absurd. It's quite impossible. Impossible, hey, screeched the ogre, and the great foolish creature turned himself into a mouse. In an instant, Puss had pounced on him and gobbled him up, bones and all. At that moment, the royal carriage rumbled over the drawbridge, for the king, too, had spotted the castle and wondered who lived there. Welcome to the castle of the Marquis of Carabas, your majesty, said Puss, who had just jumped and eaten the last morsels of the ogre from his whiskers. What? Cried the king, turning to the young boy. Is this yours too? The boy glanced at Puss and then nodded. May we see inside? Asked the king. So the king, the princess, and the miller's son looked around the castle, and a very fine one it was too. The ogre's servants were so happy to see the back of their master that they laid on a fine feast, and at the end of the meal, the king agreed to give his daughter's hand in marriage to the Marquis. As for Puss, his master was so grateful that he saw to it that the cat was made into a lord. So they all lived happily ever after, and Puss never had to chase another mouse for the rest of his life.